Tonight on The Late Debate, 3 Prime Ministers in 1 year. We look back on 12 months of political turmoil.
It is only right to explain why I'm standing here.
In just a short period, this government has acted urgently and decisively.
Like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough.
And will a generation of young Londoners pay a price for the government's latest air quality target?
We've noticed that they're more prone to getting sick. We have seen an increase of asthma pumps that are needing to be used.
Hello and welcome to The Late Debate. It's been an extraordinary year in politics. 3 Prime Ministers, 4 Chancellors and 5 Education Secretaries, not to mention the 62 government resignations that forced out then Prime Minister Boris Johnson. This year will live long in the memory as one of the most turbulent this country has ever seen. Boris Johnson began 2022 under siege. The pressure from Partygate was growing, and in January, an interim report by the senior civil servant Sue Gray led to this apology.
And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled.
Away from Parliament, London's police chief was forced to resign in April after the mayor lost confidence in her.
He has left me no choice but to step aside.
The same month, the Met slapped a fine on the Prime Minister for breaking lockdown rules.
I'm sure we'll be having plenty to say about that when the thing's finished.
In May, the fallout from Partygate was reflected in the local elections. The Tories lost 3 London councils, Barnet, Wandsworth and Westminster.
From the depths of 2019, we're back on track now for the general election.
The Labour leader was riding high.
Keir Starmer is a Londoner, he's an inner Londoner, and he's in many ways all those things that the sort of anti-London rhetoric painted by, say, the Tory party would say are bad things for a leader of the country to be, a sort of inner city metropolitan elite.
The same month, the Queen opened the new railway named in her honour, the Elizabeth Line. Over budget and overdue, but at least the public could finally see where their money went. In early July, Boris Johnson was toppled after Tory MPs and government ministers turned on him.
I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
Less than 3 years after winning a landslide election, the one-time London mayor was once again a backbencher.
He certainly said he wants to stay as the Member of Parliament for Uxbridge, and I'm sure that he'll throw his heart and soul into that and he'll get re-elected. But where things go beyond that, it depends very much on circumstances.
By September, Liz Truss was Tory leader and the Queen asked her to form a government. No one knew just days later the country would be in mourning after the death of Britain's longest-serving monarch. Kwasi Kwarteng, the MP for Spelthorne in Surrey, was now Britain's Chancellor, determined to tear up the rules.
But I'm not going to cut the additional rate of tax today, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to abolish it altogether.
But the Chancellor's plan spooked the market. Kwarteng and Truss were forced into an embarrassing U-turn and he was sacked. Truss too was backed into a corner.
I am a fighter and not a quitter.
But 24 hours later, she too was forced out, replaced by Britain's 3rd Prime Minister of 2022. Well, I'm joined now by Rushanara Ali, the Labour MP for Bethnal Green and Bow. For the Conservatives, it's Sir Bob Neill, the MP for Bromley and Chislehurst. And for the Liberal Democrats, Baroness Susan Kramer, former Transport Minister and mayoral candidate. Bob, what's it been like this year being on the rollercoaster ride that has been the Conservative Party?
Well, it's certainly been busy, I think we can safely say, Simon. I'm much happier now than I was earlier on in the year, because I think Rishi Sunak is the right person. I supported him from day one. And I think we can now actually get a bit of calm and a bit of stability.
Did you feel in the depths of despair at any point?
I think you're always, if you've been a member of a political party for 50-odd years and active in electoral politics for a long time, I think you're always disappointed when you find that your own side are scoring needless own goals and getting in the way of trying to do the things that you want to do for your constituents.
Rushanara, the polls are looking good for Labour at the moment. Is there a danger of thinking it's in the bag?
Well, look, just to go back to what this year has been like, it's been a year that has epitomised law-breaking, Partygate, abuse of power, political instability, and as your report shows, multiple changes of prime ministers and resignations, which has meant the country has not been governed. And we've then had economic instability that has had a real impact on people's lives and livelihoods.
Do you think it's enough to clinch it for Labour?
So what we need to do is make sure that we win the next general election to protect people and their lives and livelihoods. But we take nothing for granted, and we are working hard to make sure that we can win the next general election, because the Conservative Party has not been fit to govern this country, not only this year, but for a very long time.
Bob, that's quite a charge sheet from Roshnara.
Yes, but it's exaggerated, of course. I expect any opposition politician
You know
to
that's not
exaggerate
true,
a charge
Bob.
sheet, Rashad.
That's
because
not.
the truth is, yes,
No
we've gone through some
exaggeration.
very difficult times, and there have been errors that have been made. But I think the Conservative Party now is more united and much stronger. And at the end of the day, Labour, like any opposition, will criticise, but the alternative isn't there. There's not a coherent, credible economic strategy.
Bob
The next
doesn't really
election's
believe that.
The
I
next
have a huge
election's
amount
going
of time for you, Bob,
the next election is going to turn on
you don't
economics.
believe that.
Can I bring in
and
Susan
that's
here?
where I think
Because
Rishi
don't
Rishi
believe
has
that.
all the strengths.
the Lib
that are on
Dems have won some
economics.
notable by-elections this year, but there's always the danger that you're the third party, that you're squeezed by the rows between these two.
Well, just to answer your first question, I mean, my overwhelming sense this year, it's broken my heart to see people under the cost of living pressures that they've been under. And, you know, you can't but be out and about in your community, and there's someone who's facing genuine choices that I would wish never to have to make. So that shadows absolutely everything. And I agree that we as a party, I mean, we're just a year almost exactly from the win in North Shropshire, you know, True Blue forever. Then we had Tiverton and Homerton, True Blue forever. That's both going, obviously, very powerfully Liberal Democrat. We have very good May local elections. I think we're very realistic. We are building. We want to be ahead of the curve because at least we can speak policy.
You'll be
And
targeting
we
home
did, for
county
example.
seats, won't you? Tory home county seats, and even seats like Bob's.
Hadn't thought about that, Bob. Well, that's, no, I mean, the reality is I don't get deeply involved in where we target or where we don't, but, you know, we basically recognise that a lot of people who have been traditional Conservatives for a long period of time, particularly those who are in the centre of the Conservative Party, are looking for somewhere else. And that's why we won the seats that we have. And we do get constant feedback from those people that they are still looking for an alternative. So we need to be there. And as I say, we need to be there by getting the policies right. Things like the windfall tax that we would have proposed a year before anybody else imposed it.
Bob, do you think there's a chance of Boris Johnson making a comeback?
That's for Boris. My interest is making sure that Rishi Sunak has my support and support of my colleagues.
What advice would you give Boris?
I think Boris has got many things to deal with. He says he's going to stand again for Uxbridge. Great. I'm sure he'll do a great job as MP for Uxbridge. What we need to do now is get behind Rishi with fighting the key issue, which is dealing with inflation, because inflation destroys livelihoods. It makes the cost of living crisis, which is a real one, but has international ramifications as well. That makes it far worse. Getting inflation down, making things sure that people's cost of living is got under control. That's the key objective, and I hope Boris will join with us in making that case
But
to,
you know,
to
Bob,
the electors.
I think I have to challenge you a bit because that kind of chaos that existed, thanks to the Conservative Party, has actually added to all of those cost of living pressures. I mean, people who are facing their mortgage increases now. That's part of that is just due simply to the cost of chaos. That's the fact that Rishi has looked and said, basically post 2025, I'm going to slash and burn public services. That is to try and feed what he sees as the fire and concern that was fanned by all of that chaos. So, you know, we are paying a real price for it. It's not just something transitory.
Apart from a windfall tax, which actually there are precedents for. Anyway, at the end of the day, I don't see a Lib Dem alternative. Do you dispute that we need to get inflation under control? To do that, you certainly have to bring down the cost of borrowing. You have to have economic credibility. That means you can't. And the mistake that was made was to try and cut taxes without a means of fiscal consolidation. And you have to have the support of the markets, which we now have. Thank you.
Can I ask Roshnara here? Do you agree that inflation is public enemy number one?
Well, I agree that inflation is way off target. It should be within 2%. It's 10%. This is on the Conservative government's watch. And they made the situation much worse because of economic mismanagement by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. And Bob, who I have a huge amount of time for, is frankly not facing the reality of what's happened, which is that people's mortgages went up. Those who were fixing their mortgages during the mini-budget chaos saw their mortgages going up. My constituents saw that going up by hundreds of pounds. People up and down the country, first-time buyers who couldn't buy. That has a knock-on effect. But also, crucially, it's the Conservative Party in government that has destroyed Britain's economic credibility. It's a total disaster, and it's going to take a lot of work to rebuild confidence.
Okay.
It doesn't matter how many times prime ministers get changed, the fundamentals are totally damaged, and it's going to take a long time to fix it. Bob knows that. He's a learned colleague, and frankly, we've got a long way and an uphill battle to control inflation and deal with the economic mismanagement.
Let's turn briefly to what's happened at the Met this year. Bob, Sir Mark Rowley's comments this week that he's unable to sack something like 500 police officers sort of vindicate, don't they, Sadiq Khan's decision to get rid of Cressida Dick?
I think the problem that exists around police disciplinary procedures goes well beyond anything that happened with Cressida Dick, as it happens, because that's been entrenched, I'm afraid, in disciplinary process, and I know that as a lawyer for a very long time, and I don't think the police disciplinary conduct is appropriate. It does need to be changed. So I'm with Mark Rowley there. I think, on the other hand, although I think Cressida Dick got things wrong, she was also pretty shabbily treated by Sadiq Khan. And Sadiq has a track record, actually, for throwing his chief officers under a bus. He's done it with transport commissioners, he's done it with Cressida. But the real problem was that he didn't go through a proper due process. I think it had got to a stage where we needed to think again about the Met. But Sadiq can't escape his share of the responsibility for that, because he sets the political direction, he sets the strategy, which then the Commissioner has to deliver.
Ratchanara, the Mayor's been pretty frank about what he thinks of what's going on in the Met, but is there a danger that he also encourages public distrust in the force?
Look, the Met has recognised that there are serious issues and they are essentially under special measures. So I think what's really important is that Sadiq Khan, as Mayor of London, works with the government, and he is trying very hard to make sure that they work in concert to ensure that we fix the Met and address the areas where there are concerns. There are fantastic officers in our constituencies, but there are, as you say, people who are bringing the Met into disrepute, and they have no place in being, no business in being in that force. The Met has historically had a fantastic reputation around the world. We need to restore that confidence. So I think that it is right for political leaders to point out where things are going wrong and put in measures to correct them, and that's where he is.
OK. Now, when we left the EU, the government said it wouldn't row back on air quality commitments. But while Europe intends to clean up its air by 2030, the UK government has announced a target of 2040. Here in London, Sadiq Khan has confirmed his controversial proposal to expand the ULEZ. A game of hide and seek, but it's not just the children who are out of sight. The air is full of invisible toxic particles. The Burdin Bush nursery is next to the busy Old Kent Road in South London, and staff are convinced the pollution from traffic is affecting the youngsters.
We've noticed that they're more prone to getting sick. We have seen an increase of asthma pumps that are needing to be used, which is obviously going to have a long-term effect on them.
Inside the nursery, filters purify the air.
The air purifiers we have within our nursery suck in all the air. It is gone through a filter and then the fresh air is pushed out the top. It's actually a see-through filter. So this is everything that's been caught in the actual filter. It's been caught there, so it's not being pushed around the air anymore.
Few would disagree the capital's toxic air needs cleaning up. Campaigners want the UK to adopt a World Health Organization target of 2030, but the government recently decided to go for 2040.
That's 18 years' time. That is, a generation of children that are going to be growing up breathing in air that's much more polluted than it should be, and we don't think that that's fair.
In London, the Mayor has responsibility for air quality. In August, the ultra-low emission zone will be expanded to cover all of Greater London.
Before I became Mayor, experts advised it would take 193 years to clean up the area in our city. With our policies, we can do it in 5. Rather than kicking the can down the road, like the government's doing, we're fixing London's air.
Yes, it's disappointing that the goalposts have been moved another 10 years, and I absolutely understand the frustration there. but we can still do an awful lot in London. The mayor can bring his own targets in and make sure that he reaches those targets by 2030. Local councils can do the same.
In a statement, the Department for the Environment said the 2040 target can be achieved and avoids disproportionate costs on individuals and businesses. Susan, whatever your political allegiance is, do you think Sadiq Khan at least deserves credit for making London's air quality his top priority?
Well, I'm glad that he has, because it's this issue I've been arguing about, as you know, for years. To me, it's just appalling. And sometimes you see numbers of 4,000, others 9,000 premature deaths in London because of the toxicity of the air. Because you can't see it doesn't mean that it isn't there. We're becoming aware of it. I mean, there are differences in the way that some of us would approach this. I prefer a far better scrappage scheme than the one that the mayor has proposed
Somebody's
so far.
got to fund it.
Pardon?
Somebody's got to fund that.
Well, I understand that, but, there will be income as a consequence of the ULEZ. So I just think to make it really fair for people who are going to have to go out and change their vehicle, that a little more support targeted particularly at people on lower incomes would be wise. I mean, a lot of people will find their current car fits. I'm on the edge of the current ULEZ zone. Most of my neighbours over the last 2 years have changed their cars in order to make sure that they'll be able to comply with this. But we have to take it seriously. It's absolutely vital and necessary. Can I just say, though, that at the same time, TfL should not be cutting the bus service in the way that it has, because it's that bus alternative that would be viable for an awful lot of people. I've lost local bus service. I suspect both Bob and Rashara have lost bus service too.
Bob, your constituents will be hit by the expansion of the ULEZ. But do you still give Sadiq credit for tackling air quality?
We all want to tackle air quality. I've raised the issue in the Commons a number of occasions, particularly around particulate pollution, which is important. But that, of course, actually can be blown in for a considerable distance away. And I think the problem with Sadiq's approach is, assuming that the ULEZ, extending the ULEZ across the whole of London, is the silver bullet, is a mistake. It's not something that's supported in my constituency. His own consultation showed that 70% of respondents in outer London were opposed to it, 80% of businesses were opposed to it in outer London, 80% of workers in outer London were opposed. Now, what perhaps does work in inner London, I don't have a problem with that, is not necessarily something that should be rolled out on a blanket basis across the whole of London. The situation in Lewisham is massively different from the situation in Biggin Hill, right down at the bottom of Bromley, where it's very rural, and even before any reductions, there's scarce a bus service, and people don't have a railway, they don't have tubes, and it will hit the poorest hardest. And as Sue says, the scrappage scheme is inadequate, but also the alternatives aren't adequate either. So it's actually being done on this blanket basis, a very regressive approach. It will hit the hardest, worst. It will hit carers, for example, who are driving. We've got disabled people in my family, got people that the carers need to drive in. Some of them will be coming in from just outside the border. If you know, you go over towards Crayford and Dartford, the border between Bexley and Dartford goes through the middle of roads. There are cul-de-sacs where you have to go into London to then get back out into Kent. None of that is thought through. So I'm afraid, because he got London Transport's finances in a mess, back even before the pandemic, with the completely unfunded freeze in fares, which blew a hole in the budget, which he's never been able to make up. He's adopted this approach, I think, as much about raising money, despite the government putting £3 billion in to support his budgets in Transport for London. So, good objective, reducing air quality, not the way to do it, though.
I'm very disappointed to hear what Bob is saying. Basically, the situation is that there are massive health effects. Thousands of people lose their lives because of the air pollution issue in London. And in my own constituency, 97 deaths are associated with it. And when you add it up, it's about 4,000 or so. And that's a serious issue. We'll also save money in the NHS. It'll be good for business as well. And the points that Bob is making, 85% of the population will already be compliant. So the 15% that need to make the change will need support. That's correct, and that's why the scrappage system and providing support and making sure those who are vulnerable, those with disabilities, carers get the support needed is a case well made, and we've all made that, and that will be made available. And I think the final thing I would say is that we need to, of course, make sure that this is a just transition. And Sadiq gets that. And I think we need to work together as London politicians to make sure the government provides the backing to city governments, not just London, but others, to make that happen. And Bob is missing the point, because his government can actually make this real by providing the resources needed rather than punishing mayors that are trying to do the right thing. And as for transport, the government was playing politics during the pandemic, withholding funding from the city government, the mayor of London. Bob knows this. They were playing politics.
I know it's wrong, I'm afraid, Rushanara, because the hole in the budget was made by Sadiq when he first came in, first point. Second point, there are many people in outer London where a much higher pensioner population, they bought a car 10 years ago, not expecting to change it. Small businesses, much more of those in outer London, and the support will be wholly inadequate. And finally, of course, Imperial College. I take the health issues really seriously, but Imperial College. Well, no, because Imperial College did a study. Can I just make this point? Imperial College did a study, though, which showed that the impact of the ULEZ was marginal. It actually does very little to improve the air quality.
But one way to get cars off the streets is to have good public transport.
Yeah.
That doesn't look like it's happening on the railways. Susan, you're a former transport minister. How would you sort out the rail strikes?
That's, I remember when I was on TfL, so we needed to make huge changes to the way the workforce performed. And I have to say to our directors there, who were there then in that first administration, they worked so hard to build trust with the workforce, to enable them to carry through change, and made it clear that they cared as much about how the workforce came out of this as anybody else. And to me, as I look at where we are now, I don't want to see these strikes. They may indeed end my whole Christmas plans and holidays, and they're going to hurt other people. So I don't want to see these strikes. I protect, though, the right to strike. But a decent management that builds that kind of trust with the workforce, and in order to carry change through. And I'm very dismayed. And it's not just transport, is it? I mean, we're virtually in a form of do-it-yourself general strike. And I do think this is going to be really tough on people. And I just say to the government, you need to be there at the table and making sure that you really are engaged with making sure the workforce come out of this well.
Susan, Bob, Rushanara, thank you very much indeed for coming in this evening. And that's all from the Late Debate for this year. I'll be back in the new year. Until then, have a safe and happy Christmas and New Year. And thank you for watching. Good night.